Hi, Tina, you're muted.
Thank you for helping me to unmute myself. Giggle. What I was saying is good afternoon or good evening or good morning to everyone from wherever you might be joining us. My name is Tina Campt, and on behalf of the organizers, as well as on behalf of all of the panelists this evening, thank you so much for joining us for the final panel of the workshop slash convening. This final event is a reading by Dionne Brand, followed by responses and conversations with four exceptional panelists: Mabel Wilson, Saidiya Hartman, Andrea Davis, and Françoise Vergès. Before starting the reading and the conversation, I'd like to remind everybody that closed captioning is available for this webinar. To access it, please select Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be posting the link to the YouTube live stream in the chat shortly. And please feel free to use the hashtag #MAP@20 to share your comments and reactions via social media. Like the previous events, we are going to begin this conversation by marking the violent histories of where we are, making note of and reminding us of the ongoing conflicts and contradictions of this land, this water, this air. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee. The meeting place of Toronto remains the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Islands. These Americas are built on violence and erasure, and we bring these histories with us. Those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as whites, slavery, imperialism, went to Toronto. The local meeting from an ongoing war presence. It is I was with a big I wrote. Getting to the meat of the conversation, I'm just going to shorten them somewhat. And I'm being told that my internet is glitchy, and I apologize for that. There's not really anything I can do other than try and make these introductions, get off the table, get off the screen, and maybe try and move to another room. So let me introduce the speakers in the order that they will be speaking to us, actually responding. The first will be Mabel Wilson, who is the Nancy and George Rupp Professor of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, a professor of African American and African Diasporic Studies, and the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University, where she also co-directs the Global Africa Lab. Her research investigates space, politics, and cultural memory in Black America, race and modern architecture, new technologies, and the social production of space. She is the author of two books, Begin with the Past, Building the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and Negro Building, Black Americans in the World Fairs and Museums. Our second respondent, Saidiya Hartman, is university professor at Columbia University. Hartman is a scholar of African American literature and cultural history, whose works explore the afterlife of slavery in modern American society and bear witness to lives, traumas, and fleeting moments of beauty that historical archives have omitted or obscured. She is the author of 3 books: Scenes of Subjection, Terror, Slavery, and Self-Making in 19th Century America, Lose Your Mother, A Journey Along the African Slave Route, and Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. Françoise Vergès is a Paris-based political theorist. She is the author of numerous books, including Monsters and Revolutionaries, Colonial Family Romance, and Métissage. She writes on slavery, colonialism, imperialism, decolonial feminism, and new politics of dispossession and racialization. She is the curator of L'Atelier, a regular collective workshop among artists and scholars and other events. She is an activist in the global anti-racist struggle. And Andrea Davis is associate professor in Black cultures and the Americas in the Department of Humanities at York University, and she is the co-editor of the Journal of Canadian Studies. Her research focuses on the literary productions of Black women in the Americas. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Horizon, Sea, Sound, Caribbean and African women's cultural critiques of nation, which will be published by Northwestern University Press. And last, but most especially not least, Dionne Brand, the person who's been celebrating her accomplishments for over 3 days, is a poet, a novelist, and essayist known for formal experimentation and the beauty and urgency of her work. Her award-winning volumes include Land to Light On, Thirsty, Inventory, and Ossuaries, which is the winner of the Griffin Poetry Prize. Her latest work, The Blue Clerk, an essay poem, won the Trillium Book Award. And Theory, her latest of 5 novels, won the Toronto Book Award. She is the author of the influential nonfiction work that we have been celebrating, A Map to the Door of No Return, Notes to Belonging. Her most recent nonfiction work is an autobiography of the autobiography of reading. Brand is a recipient of the 2021 Wyndham Campbell Prize for Fiction. Nomenclature, New and Collective Poems, will be published in 2022. She served as Toronto's 3rd Poet Laureate from 2009 to 2012, and she is currently professor in the School of English and Theatre Studies at the University of Guelph. We will begin, as I previously announced, with a reading by Dionne, followed by responses and reflections by the discussants in the order in which I introduced them. So, Dionne, I yield the stage to you now. Welcome.
Dionne, you are muted.
We can't hear you, Dionne.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Tina, for that introduction. First, I have a brief poem of names, people I would like to thank for allowing MAP to limn, to surrender itself into your voices and your texts and your thoughts these past few days, for writing the other notes, the ones that I couldn't, the other maps that I had no access to at the time, and that I only have access to now because you've thought them. I feel something like rescue that this tentative and provisional map arrived. I feel something like relief that its cracked frequencies could be heard and its gestures to temporalities made their way through capital's affective and material economies. So thank you, John Robert Lee, Lola Olufemi, Jan Anderson, Natalia, Hunter Young, Nick, Kay, Rachel, Mordecai, Robin, Maynard, Leslie Sanders, Nahal Al-Hadi, Sylvia Hamilton, Carol Boyce Davies, Darcy Ballantyne, Jean Gugi, Otonia Okutbitek, Juanita Stevens, David Cheriandi, Ilva Habel, Alexis Pauline Gums, Michael Buckner, Bev Bain, Natalie Bratavi, Andrea Fatana, Ashanti Reese, Sylvia Hamilton again, Otonia again, Tavia Nyongo, William C. Anderson, Amber Johnson, Savannah Shange, Unsong Kim, Leanne Bidamusaka Sake, Simpson, Jamila Imani Morris, Andrea Medavorsky, Daphne Lamoth, Emmanuel Teferi, Adia Benton, Nalini Mohabir, Kevin Adonis Brown, Belinda Kazim Kaminsky, Michelle Molubi, Aisha Campbell, Alexis Pauline Gums again, Erica Violet Lee, Imani Robinson, Shivani Lorm Lochan, Kevin Kwashi, Emily Greenwood, Ronaldo Walcott, Deborah McDowell, Nia Love, Abdi Osman, Christina Battle, Mohammed Abdul Karim Ali, Cecily Nicholson, Chantal Gibson, Kiguro Macharia, Tiana Reed, Sam Tekel, Zakia Iman Jackson, Natalie Diaz, Tokwase Dyson, Kai Kellogg, Brandon Shimoda, Namjala Nyabola, J. Austin Williams, Amber Star Friendly, Evan Michael Lee, Danielle A.D. Howard, Josh Myers, Ronald Cummings, Marcel Ann Fletcher, Badur Alagra, Warren Critchlow, Biko Mandela Gray, Alyssa Trotz, John Moore, A.K. Payne, Clark Burnett, The Dwellers, Shaughnessy Brown, Vijay, Aya, and Wadada Leo Smith, Ajay Hebel, Alberta Whittle, Arthur Jaffer, Mabel Wilson to come, Saidiya Hartman to come, Françoise Verges to come, Tina Campt. And then sublimely and so much gratitude for keeping company and thinking alongside all of you. Ganesia Lubrin, Ellen Walker, Ronaldo Walcott, again, Leslie Sanders, David Cheriandi, Marcel Ann Fletcher, Michelle Malubi, Aisha Campbell, Andrea Davis, Christina Sharpe. So grateful for the company you give me and the life you make me, okay? Thank you so much. I'll just read a short piece from A Map to the Door of No Return. Up here, Kalibishi. Up here, you are in the world. It is ochre and blue-black, and nothing you can call rock. But if you can imagine before rock, molten obelisk, walls of volcanic mud jagging out into the ocean, and the ocean voluminous, swift, and chaotic. But perhaps it is we who are chaotic, and the ocean orderly. We in disarray, and the orange ochre rock mannered. Up here you are in the world, and you want to stay, though in the evening your eyes over the windward mist to Marie Galante in the horizon closing down. And in Marie Galante you conjure the chaos you know of a city. Perhaps over on Marie Galante, someone else like you looking south to Dominica, Kalibishi, where you are, someone else sitting on a similar veranda, someone else is conjuring chaos. Though they cannot see a city in Kalibishi, so their eyes would brush past farther on to Marigot. So you are here alone then, and you cannot hold on or control the orderliness of the real world, but you are here as all around you the light goes suddenly and quickly as light goes, and the noises of dusk arise, describable and indescribable, the noise of crickets singing loudly and all at once, beginning at the same moment as darkness envelops you. Up here in Kalibishi, you are in the world and wondering, what is the sound you make? What is the business you do? Who are you in this orderliness that does not seem to need you? Well, you sit there on a veranda at Kalibishi and you feel everything. Feel the soft, moist breeze across your body. Smell the musk of the sea. Hear the creak and shush of the Point Siena. As suddenly and as quietly your eyes shift from conjuring a city to save you. Suddenly and as quietly, everything is passing, all you've lived, and you are sitting in the lap of something big, some intimacy. The next day, we drive into the Carib territory, and it is about midday, and only fools like us are out on the road in the middle of the day when bare feet burn on the asphalt, and the rainforest road is humid and long. You get the sense that the mountain road and the tree fern and the palmiste have been here absorbing and deflating other foolish incursions. The maxi taxi stops and we get out, going into the shop. A Carib man looks me in the eye as if he knows me, and I settle into his look. And I buy a hat whose strands of flex, he explains, have been buried in levels of mud, dyed there in grades of brown and red. We climb back into the van and he looks at me again as if I should be staying. And where am I off to now? And I am half surprised but half convinced that, well, of course I should be staying. He sent his son, like my brother, to give me a small basket as a gift, as if to say, well, here then, go if you're determined, but take this with you. I had noticed at the back of the shop, my sister, his daughter, a whole world was in her face. 3,000 years of Siboney, then Arawak, then Carib, canoeing north from South America before it was South America, 1,000 years AD. In her face, all the battles against the French and English for 2 centuries, the hit and run and the intractable mountains that kept this island Carib until 1763. Until settling to the west and east, they crept into her face too. And in her face now, African, which people? Ga, Ashanti, Igbo, washed in, wept in, with all the waters of hundreds of rivers and rivulets. I swam some of those rivers, the sluggish Kribish, the crackling fresh Sari-Sari, the swelling magnificent Layu, the River Clare, the River Crapaud, Taberi, Moulette, Waiapiri. I tried to swim them all 365, and say them all over and over. Rivière Jacques, Rivière Blanche, Canary, River Douce, Malabuca, Père du Temple. And all this Dahomey in her face that would name the valley to the southwest, the Valley of Desolation. Well, I left them in the road of the Carib territory, waving, and the van moved on, chewing up still rugged highway, over to Mahout and Massacre. Massacre, Rochester says in Jean Rees's Wild Sargasso Sea, and who was massacred there? Slaves? Oh no, Antoinette answers, foreshadowing her own erasure in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Not slaves. Something must have happened a long time ago. Nobody remembers now. When Rochester arrives in Massacre, it was raining. Huge drops sounded like hail on the leaves of the trees, and the sea crept stealthily forwards and backwards. He had feared it might be the end of the world. When I arrived in Masak, it was gleaming. The sky a glittering blue, and the road, which was sea and road at once, was full of people. The rum shop was busy, and someone in the van said, "These Masak people are always on the street, day or night. This town is always lit up." The town had a certain feeling of careening, all bare feet and flower dresses, all old men with sticks and young ones with soccer balls, all hips held to laugh and children playing fiercely. The next morning, I wake up in Roseau, the sunlight pouring through the jalousie, and something else, the sound of Roseau. Nothing sweeter than children going to school, sunburning their lips in laughter and their own schemes. Nothing sweeter in the morning than Roseau women singing in patois, "Sakafetna," and answering, "Muela, how are you? I'm there, I'm there." I've lain in cities, in rooms in cities, listening before, but this Roseau is the sweetest sounding. You can't tell the difference between laughing and quarreling. So I'm there, and I wait until the morning sound turns to mid-morning, and then the silence of noon, and then it starts all over again. And then, like and unlike Calabishi, because Roseau is a city, night's intimacy passes over the buildings and the streets and the commerce and over the water again. Thank you.
I want to express my sincerest gratitude to Dionne for her magisterial practice that has brought us a map to the door of no return, among many other profound works. I also want to thank Christina and Andrea for organizing this remarkable 4-day convening, and thank Tina for moderating today. Before I begin, if the screen is dark, no worries, it's part of the video. Let me see if I can adjust this so this doesn't crowd. Perfect. To join Dionne Brand in a map of door to the door of no return is to take a journey quite distinct from the West's well-worn genre of the epic that fetes great men whose great risks meet with even greater rewards. Instead, Brand sutures her transatlantic bricolage of time and space with disruptions and displacements whose redactions and erasures illuminate the efficacy of forgetting. Brand, in a map to the door of no return, reminds me that when we began our journey to document the modern architecture of Ghana, we first had to find a printed map of Accra, which at the time proved no easy task. Our hand-drawn dots locating modernist monuments on the map bled into the paper to unleash other trajectories in all directions, off the page, into the city, into history. For us, this trip became a lesson in listening to the various strains of modernity, its quotidian tonalities resonating through the teeming markets of Makola, and the rooster's crow in front of the hair salon, housed in a half shipping container on a side street of Osu, outside of Du Bois's final refuge, at a flower-like opera house financed through the hollow promises of China's win-win neo-colonialism. We listened at the monstrous forts, historical sites of colonial extraction looming over the shores where fishermen still launched their small wooden boats. Once adrift, their crafts were dwarfed by today's monstrous sites of extraction, offshore platforms whose flames pierce where night meets the sea on that side of the Atlantic. This fort was a doppelganger to Brand's Fort King George, where she writes that this novel begins in a museum, a small white museum, which once housed 18th century British colonial military. It has the smell of all colonial buildings, a yellow handwritten papery mustiness, which reminds one. And I too am reminded of a white museum on that trip to Ghana, not a small one, but a massive one, whose air still hung thick with the mustiness of moss, dirt, and stone. The woman I saw there reminds me, maybe of me, as we looked up into the stone vault's arc of what the museum's directional map denoted as the female slave dungeon. Did our ancestor mothers part ways 10, 12 generations ago, cleaved apart? Hers stayed while mine was swept away to a colony named Virginia, a place called Carolina. A dankness, perhaps a fetid memory of sweat, fear, and sorrow dwelled there. Though ephemeral, its mnemonic embers were still quite capable of igniting terror. Brand reminds me of these phantasmic reverberations when she writes, that fissure is represented in the door of no return, that place where our ancestors departed one world for another, the old world for the new, the place where all names were forgotten and all beginnings recast. This Elmina is but one of many castle fortifications duly marked on maps like the one by English cartographer Herman Mall, where his cartographic flourishes embellished regions with titles like Negro Land, above the shores of the Grain Coast, Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, Slave Coast. This is the foundational architecture of the West's colonial enterprise, built to function as fort, as castle, as barracoon, as domicile, as barrack, as penitentiary, as warehouse, as factory, as trading post, whipping post, as dock and door all in one. Is not flexibility, multi-use, the hallmark of modern architecture? A cousin to the cartographic, the orthographics of architectural drawing capably projects through plan and section the spatial differences from here from there, mine from yours, Black from white, male from female, human from thing. Did not this propensity toward abstraction, good design, make the stench of extractions more tolerable, hence certainly more profitable? Brand reminds me that she saw these castles in photographs, keenly aware that if she visited, her very being would be destroyed. These places that made everyone who went through forget their names. Here, walls ate the skin, footsteps took the mind. My grandfather's forgetting was not personal. It had been passed on to him by many, most especially the one in my family who stepped through the door of no return. It was a gift, forgetting. As much as it is a memoir, Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return shows us how forgetting can be a prophylactic against the onto-epistemic violence built into the modern world's every brick, stone, and steel pillar. Every effort to remember the past works against a counter action of letting go, though not as a dialectical synthesis meant to feed progress's voracious appetite. Rather, for Brand, memory and forgetting nest. Akin to what narrator and Chris Marker's visual drift Sans Soleil recalls. He wrote me, I will have spent my life trying to understand the function of remembering, which is not the opposite of forgetting, but rather its lining. We do not remember, we rewrite memory, much as history is rewritten. How can one remember thirst? It is adrift in these fissures, these spatial voids, these apertures of the mind that Brand reminds me what we must do with the maps, drawings, and plans that fueled fever dreams of untold material wealth, fine country estates, towering office building, and column-encrusted banks. I cannot undo Jeffrey's words, which might look like simple directions to some. I cannot unhappen history, neither can my characters. When asked, as in Derek Walcott's poem, where are your monuments, your battles, martyrs? Where your tribal memory? My characters answer in that poem, sir, in that gray vault, the sea. The sea has locked them up. My characters can only tear into pieces both history and Jeffrey's. Observations, they can only deliberately misplace directions and misread observations. Still, at her fort, at my fort, entropy reigns. The wind, waves, salt-laden air, and pollution. The earth tremors, footsteps, and bodies wear away its stone, iron, and wooden architecture. Forces of time and gravity erodes particle by particle, these monuments to discovery, to trade, to genius, to theft, to rape. This is where Brand reminds me and that other self encountered in the fort that a map then is only a life of conversations about a forgotten list of irretrievable selves. Thank you, and I turn it over to Saidiya.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's an honor to be here and to join you all. One enters a room and history follows. One enters a room and history proceeds. History is already seated in the chair in the empty room when one arrives. What is the matter of history through which Dionne Brand offers guide? This history that arrives in the room with us is not the captor's history, even as it is a history of captivity. It is not history as the project in Handmaiden of Europe, or the plots and stories that create the fatal divide, the caesura between the West and the rest of us, or the self-aggrandizing romance of nation, or even a narrative with a fixed and certain plot, no once upon a time, no myths of origin or claims of autochthony. If there is no map to the door, no cartography that could graphically represent its space-time coordinates, because as Brand observes, the door is not a place, an externality fixed in a particular territory in an exact epoch or period, but rather the door is knowledge sense more than acknowledged or even fully conscious. It touches us, but without fully emerging as an object of cognition. Then how might one write the disaster, the terrible history carried in our gestures, residing in our bodies, marked on our flesh, etched onto our retinas? Is history no more able or capable than the map of yielding an adequate story of the door, or more important, our lives before the door? Brand writes to intensify this crisis, not resolve it. After detailing the impossible being of those lodged inside the metaphor, and describing the absent presence, the physical departure and psychic renting that is the door, after perceiving this tear in the world, after reckoning with the ordinary brutality that is its issue, Brand attends to its substrate, time itself, tangled registers. The durative conveys both the character, the continuing, the incomplete, and the ongoing. And the durative tense has been described as a tense of vision in which the writer sees what happened and the action described going and unfolding before her eyes. In Map, this durative tense or temporal inhabitation creates a web of dense association that extends from the West African coast to the Black Shoals of Gaia, to the Burnt River, to the dreams of revolution tumbling down a hill in Grenada. These intense zones of feeling, thickets of heartbreak and grief, eruptions of love, radiant moments of ordinariness, small spaces opening up inside us like those pools of red and undulating light and beloved, engulf those who pass through them. They solicit and threaten to undo us, to encounter the door, to gaze at the Atlantic, to descend into the hole, to make the revolution and witness the counter-revolution. These are Brand's red pools of light. We pass through these spaces and all that we have lost, and the long history of our defeat fills us with a grief that is all but unbearable. The questions that arise before the door, how we might exist before it, before not as an interior or prior state, but exist in the face of it. A philosophy of time is articulated in a series of queries. Leaving, to leave, left. These words are as heartbreaking as any in the text. Are we still in the hold of the door, still departing and cast away, our lives still framed by it, leaving gerund, ongoing condition, a permanent state or irreparable one, to leave infinite and anticipated, recurring, to leave again and again, implied, though not explicitly stated, left, gone, over, declarative, deceptive, as if the facts of our lived experience could be explained by simple predicates, by past participles, the delusion and the lure of a state over and done with. Brand breaks and deranges this grammar of how we exist in time. How can we have left when we are still in the wake? Language can be deceptive, Brand replies to such doubts, emphasizing the crisis of how we survive and endure, how we inhabit what is uninhabitable rather than resolve it. What language would prove capable of conveying this rupture in history, a rupture in the quality of being confirmed by the routine violence, the brutal accumulation and ordinary terror of our lives? Lives spoken, as she writes, in the blunt language of brutality. Even beauty was brutal. Yet Map is not a chronicle of brutality or mere inventory of violence. How able to convey us to the door and yet not break us? The image repertoire, the sounds of life, whether of the ocean or Coltrane, the beautiful assemblage of paragraphs, the compositions of its sections and chapters comprise a way of doing that provide no facile or simple answers, but yet allows us to breathe in rooms saturated with history and red light. The distillation of time is a significant dimension of what allows us to endure the whole, yet not be asphyxiated. Even as this history is catastrophic and its damage ongoing, time is malleable and plastic. Brand explodes its continuum in her prose and poetics. Her now is filled with the then and the before and the not yet and the might be. across her corpus, her acute rendering of what it means to inhabit this man's world requires a shift of temporal perspective so that time is on the move as we are, not confined to the regulation of the clock or reduced to homogenized and empty units or the uniform divisions of duration and existence and disposable lifetime for purposes of death and exploitation. There is the more than, and the might be rendered in its fold. This sense of time to be simultaneously free of, in the face of it, in the hold of it. Brand's is a historical sensibility that is submarine and that troubles the notion of an unfolding chronicle, or the very idea that history proper might explain the door rather than being what it has produced and its instrument, the chronicle of our dispossession, a fable of cause and effect, a tale of tragedy and triumph, a billetdoux of objects becoming subjects and citizens, of errant and anomalous social formations domesticated and regulated in the family romance. Those in diaspora exist in a place that is no place, inhabit an impossible metaphor. This rift of the door and the Atlantic cultivates an alternate sense of time and event, as entangled, as compounded and synchronic, recursive and sedimented. This rupture as history, this tear as the experience of time, engenders a quality of time expressed in the fullness of the moment, in the smallness of the gesture. One might say that it operates at another frequency, and one explored in the 20 years of work produced since MAP, and especially in Ossuary's and the Blue Clerk. On page 91, Brand writes, I remember standing at the top of the street to my house when I was 13 thinking, I will leave here and never return. I am not going to live here. Already the books in my mind were read. Already I was forgetting faces and names. The moment she, the 13-year-old, proves able to name definitively or to conceive her street and her house, no longer as taken for granted atmosphere, as the environment simply there, but as the place of her worlding, she is solidly lodged in the post-lapsarian. The girl experiences and perceives time in this separation from and falling away of the world. This rupture and temporal implosion are conveyed by Brand's distinctive narration that eschews narrative in troubling the distinction between prose and poetry, and flitting across centuries. So in one moment we exist in a room with William Boseman on the Slave Coast, in another on a hilltop with Morris Bishop on a small island replete with the promise of breaking the door, of freeing us from its hold. MAP's recursive and diffuse structure is an open-ended assemblage. Brand, like Ferreira de Silva, is trying to unthink the world. She too questions, how might we release the world from the procedures and the tools that presumes that everything that exists or happens is an expression of the human? Before the 13-year-old knows what she knows, she feels and perceives that universal time is as much a sign of the damaged world as the general misery, the scarred face, the damaged limbs, the violated daughters, the tragic men brawling on the beach, trying to destroy each other. Is this how time unfolds, as the forgetting of all the things that are and were dear to us and that we cannot recall, the small space opening again and again? Is this anticipated loss, ready and waiting, another mark of the door and its terrible endowment, this ready drift toward oblivion, the ability to forget everyone, like the boy Douglas calling his mother a stranger, no longer remembering her face and having to learn again what her mother is, and as a grown man, negating the negated maternal function and wanting still to provide that boy child with a mother, or baby Suggs with 8 children gone, and all she could remember of the firstborn is how she loved the burned bottom of bread. This 13-year-old suspended at the top of the street names her world and loses her belonging in the same breath. This acuity of detail and regard, while deftly attending to the magnitude of absence and oblivion, is MAP's achievement. Now, this quality of time, which I can describe inadequately, it is inadequately with a series of placeholders, entangled and complete, a vessel of each and every moment, a now of the all and the everything. This time saturates the circumstantial account, and in this regard, Brand's maps and notes, her inventories, her verbless grammars of description, her archives of verso pages, her odes and nomenclatures are for the time being, for the meantime, for us in our dire need and in our beautiful terribleness. For these notes to belonging offer an account of our becoming and our existence in the catastrophe, in the ship's hold and in the enclosure of the cognitive scheme, in the map and in the ledger, in the columns of credits and debits, and as well, and to, and also, and necessarily, and inescapably, and in and as the possibility of an opening to something else, in and as the contestation of the given, in and as the always escapes and the possibilities afforded by drifting and detour. Brand offers us a waymaking to nowhere. The girl stands at the top of the street, but the street is already a ghost. Quote, I never returned to that street, that house with the hibiscus fence and the butterflies hovering over zinnias. Is perception most acute precisely at the very moment at which that to which one has belonged falls away? Is this why the mother country is most sweet in the mouth of those gone, missing, left, taken, and exiled? Is the moment one recognizes a home as the home, the very same moment in which you lose it, like that girl floating at the top of the street, recognizing all that she loves and simultaneously overwhelmed by the knowledge that she is destined to leave it, and that knowledge is tantamount to loss itself? Is that too knowledge of the door? Is non-belonging the price of this regard, this perception that breaks her and breaks her away from what has been atmosphere and environment? She will return to that street again and again, but only in imagination. In verso 4 of The Blue Clerk, Brand returns to that street in an exquisite narration of time enfolding, not unfolding, but time held, embraced, folded over, enveloped, clasped in one's arms, cleaved, gathered, like a garment to be wrapped in the surround of time, and in turn to clasp, to circle, to encompass, to carry, to surrender to its whole. Time is like the flesh folding back onto itself, like a trap or an enclosure, like a caress or an act of tenderness, like the door holding on to and never letting us go. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's really a great honor to contribute to the 20-year public celebration of Dionne Brand. I am from Réunion Island in the Indian Ocean. I call it the island of wandering soul. And I want to say something in Réunionnais Creole to Dionne, to thank her for what she gave us. There is no need to translate it. Quand on dit la point vérité, que ça veut dire nous les ensemble, qu'on n'a pas fait rien, ou cause pour nous toutes la traverse la porte. Mais il y a un grand merci d'ailleurs, vraiment un grand merci. So reading a map to the door of no return, not to belonging, has given me great pleasure. But also, as Dionne has written between time, she has helped me to make sense of what I've been witnessing in recent weeks. The current door of no return, the current site of belonging and unbelonging. Watching African women, children, and men of all ages embarking on fragile boats along the coast of Libya or Tunisia. Listening to Asian women, children, and men walking from the South America to the United States or to Canada. Watching Syrian and African and Afghan refugees wandering in sub-zero temperature in the forests across the border between Belarus and the Czech Republic. Brutalized body, as Dionne has written. Asian going through the Darien Gap, called by Al Jazeera the most dangerous route of migration, but also the Pan-American gateway to hope. Some come from Haiti, others from far west Chile, which they describe as very racist. Others from Brazil, which they say has nothing to offer them. Living with huge bag tapped on their back, women with baby in their arms, men holding little children, crossing rivers, climbing mountains. Soon there is no longer water and food. Women cover their body with mud to discuss the groups of armed men who attack migrants along the way. This group of armed men steal their papers, their clothes, their money, everything. Haitians say they have seen so many bodies on the way, drowned, dead of exhaustion, killed by militarized militia, that they no longer bury them. Body without sepulture, ghost haunting the forest of Panama. Babies, some barely 1 month old, sleep in their mother's arms. They are silent or they cry because of dehydration and anger. Little children remain close to their parents. All have bleeding feet, their bodies beaten by insects, their papers stolen or destroyed, everything lost. No food, no water, no medicine. They say, we did not know it would be so hard, so difficult, so traumatic. Yet, they will continue toward the United States or Canada, where children will be separated from their parents, or will be put in camps, beaten and traumatized. Sometimes they burn their papers, so they cannot be sent back. They burn also their finger, so the border police cannot have their fingerprint. They change their name. They say that they are searching for a better life, for a job to feed their family, for a place where the children will have a future. What sight are imprinted on the eye? What sound will remain in memory? There are Afghan and Syrian refugees crossing also mountains and rivers, beaten by border patrol, forced to stay in place, forbidden to NGO, freezing in the cold, without food, water, blanket, policemen destroying their tents, pissing on their blanket when they have them. The African enslaved along their journey to Europe, drowning in the Mediterranean and the North Sea, harassed, beaten, killed, maritime cemetery. Police stealing their phones, adding to their distress. When we say brutalized body, when Dionne used that term, we must give it content. It is so deep, so limitless. The police want them to have no rest, no moment where they can breathe. Anxiety, stress, dread must organize their social life, the life of Black and brown people. Living was never voluntary, Dionne has written. So when I hear white saying that they were not forced to leave their country, I get very angry. When they say that they are looking for a better life, they speak of countries which built a better life from the exploitation of Black and brown body for the extraction of their resources from looting and stealing. They come to what they call a better life because the North is transforming the South in an impossible place to live. Among the brutalized body that cross the door of no return, the body of the Haitian stand apart. They embody exactly what the white supremacy does not want to exist. The Haitian Revolution is still an unbearable event for white supremacy. It should not have happened. No Black Napoleon, no Dessalines, no Roi Christophe. It is not surprising that the Haitian victory upon the Napoleon army in Vertières on November 18, 1803, never appears in French history, and that name, Vertières, is barely known. Haitians must remain outside of history. When they cross the door and come knocking on the doors of the white country, asking for the due, they are chased, beaten, martyrized. Brutality is the foundation of racial capitalism. There cannot be peace under racial capitalism. We have to create space of peace, not peace as a short moment between wars that white men decide, but revolutionary peace against the permanent state of war that racism, patriarchy, capitalism, and imperialism need to maintain domination. They are constantly creating an economy of dispossession, exhaustion, and suffocation. What is described in the slave ship or in the barracks, in the fortress at Elmina or Gorée, making the air irrespirable, killing by suffocation, is still the way racial capitalism exercises its domination. By air pollution, by chemical contamination, by polluting the water and the air, restricting the lungs, forbidding people to breathe, Black and brown children, Black and brown people. They cannot breathe. So in that door, when Dionne talked about mapping, we need to map today the new refuge and sanctuaries that will help the migrant and refugee along the way, where they can be held, where they can find a warm drink, a clean bed, a warm shower, people with whom to cry and to laugh. Mapping these refuge and sanctuary, finding where they can find fake paper, where they can call families and friends and learn safe passage. Plus, where they can gather new strengths and courage to fight back. If today doors of no return are not those that were on the shores of Africa, the one Dionne has so beautifully evoked, act nonetheless still as a ghost. But we should not forget also that this migrant and refugee on their way, mapping new roads, show incredible courage and fortitude, strength and determination. In the wretch of the sea, les damnés de la mer, and damnés is in the feminine, the author describes African women once they have arrived in Italy and are in camp. They refuse to play the victims. They do not want to retell every violence they encounter to white people, to the white NGO. The young share makeup and selfies. Those with children exchange information about where to find milk, toys. All want to leave the camp and build a life. They exchange maps that signal place to avoid and place to look for. They learn to belong and to unbelong. They know that they are, as Dionne has written, other dwellers at the door. They know that they will prepare their arrival. The map of no return, the map to the door of no return, describe a place of belonging and unbelonging, a place that challenges the question of origin and sovereignty and nationalism. This is what we're offering. This is what we should think for the future. At the map of the door of no return, at the place from which we imagine the future, because this is history. And in that, Dionne has written for all of us who are making this place where to belong, but not a place to dominate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mabel, Saidiya, Françoise. You've given us so much alongside that beautiful, evocative reading by Dionne. When I found a map to the door of no return, it provided an unexpected and startling clarity about what it means to exist in diasporic time. It took all the clues I had been accumulating about myself and ordered them with the most beautiful precision. It offered a radical practice of map making that helped me find myself in and through the world, not as a set of directions that point the way to some final destination, but as an opening up of unending possibilities and discoveries that change with each journey. In a reference to cartographer Thomas Jeffries that Mabel invoked earlier, Brand notes his role in directing the safe passage of slave ships into Tobago, and then spectacularly overturns this colonial logic. She writes, I use Jeffries' observations not as he had to show a way to slavery, but to sail my characters into the late 20th century. I cannot unhappen history, and neither can my characters. My characters can only tear into pieces both history and Jeffries' observations. They can deliberately misplace directions and misread observations. They can take north for south, west for east. They can, in the end, impugn the whole theory of directions. They inhabit everywhere. Their lives take any direction at any moment. End quote. This refusal to be contained by colonial cartographers, this recognition of the possibilities of flight and marronage, or what Saidiya Hartman calls waywardness, marks Black people's journeys across the far reaches of the world as a diasporic practice of survival, each journey taking them beyond the laws mandating their demise and into new configurations of life beyond death. The map that Brand offers is not a set of calculations moving us toward an arrival, and neither is it meant to facilitate return to heal the rupture of history. The specter of transatlantic slavery, as Mabel demonstrates, lingers for African diasporic peoples as a wound, Brand says, much deeper than the physical, a wound which somehow erupts in profound self-disappointment, self-hatred, and disaffection. Since our being is lodged in the metaphor of the door as a kind of fiction, self-creation is our only mode of recovery. In these acts of invention, Caribbean women living in diasporic presence, marked by the ongoing violences of conquest, slavery, indenture, motherhood, and death, find the opening into another kind of history, another kind of map making. In Brand's novel At the Fall and Change of the Moon, published a year before Map, she reimagines the hanging of Thisbe, who Jackie Alexander renames Kitsimba, an enslaved woman who poisons the plantation and is tortured, hanged, and burned. Brand notes, as Emily Greenwood recalls, that at her hanging she is reported to have said, "This is but a drink of water to what I have already suffered." In an interview with Rinaldo Walcott and Leslie Sanders, Brand admits that she is fascinated both by the resolve these words signal and the horror they encode, the complexity and contradiction of an act that is intended to free, but is also an act of death. And so Brand inscribes this contradiction onto her character, Marie Ursule. In repeated acts of infanticide, Marie Ursule refuses to give birth to the children required for the plantation economy, all of them stillborn except for Bola, her one curiosity and her vanity. Marie Ursule indulges this one weakness for her baby daughter by allowing her to live. In her dual act of death and salvation, Marie Ursule challenges both the racist, patriarchal foundations of slavery and Western notions of the family. By destroying the enslaver's property and refusing his right to possession, while simultaneously freeing her daughter from the status of chattel and from her own maternal and future hierarchical relationships, Marie Ursule offers a suggestive response to Hortense Spiller's problematic of kinship. Under conditions of captivity, Spillers argues, the offspring of the female does not belong to the mother, nor is she related to the owner, although the latter possesses it, and in the African American instance, often fathered it. Precisely by challenging the historical conditions of captivity, Brand's character is able to rethink Black humanity as a failed expression of the family, releasing her daughter from social and economic ownership and possession by projecting her into a future shadowed but not directly touched by slavery. But by also choosing to die, She accepts as a mother that Black life exists as a condition of historical violence and emerges from context of familial dislocation and loss. In refusing to love too deeply or possess things, Bola in turn rejects the competitive forms of citizenship demanded by nation states and their cartographies, and bequeaths a practice of survival to her generations. Instead of owning them, she spread her children around so that all would never be gathered in the same place to come to the same harm. These generations map the contours of new possibilities in routes and seaways across the Black Atlantic. The 1833 Abolition of Slavery Act was not a document for freedom in the Caribbean, but a delimitation of a freedom still to come. It leaves no space from which one might begin to imagine a future in which the descendants of chattel slavery are dispersed, shining and dry-faced in cities across the world. These African diasporic communities, Brand explains in the interview with Walcott and Sanders, would have had to have the most magnificent of imaginations to envision themselves where they had landed or where I had seen them, she says, or where I had apprehended them. And so she transforms Marie Ursul's whim and vanity and her hopelessness and her skill into a circumoceanic diasporic imaginary that unravels completely Jeffrey's maps and provides the opening, the leap into the imagination that projects Bola's children into the future present. As a symbolic mother of the Black Atlantic, Bola knows that the losses of the Middle Passage cannot be recovered. But her skill is also a refusal to believe in endings. Life will continue, she insists, no matter what it seems, and even after that, someone will remember you. And even after that, it could be just the whiff or thought of things you loved. And so the ocean she loves becomes a generation's map of the world, and the memories she bequeaths are an unending story of recovery, even in loss. She knows that beyond every entrapment brought to bear against Black life, that life will continue. It is this clarity and courage that Dionne Brand's map gives me as a Black woman, a mother, and a scholar. A way to see, to hurt, to feel, but also a way to dream, to move, to sit still, to live in relation and not possession. A way to be. Thank you, Dionne, so much for this gift.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I just need to take a moment, just a moment to appreciate all of these contributions. I feel like there needs to be a pause or a breath, but at the same time, I know that we have a limited amount of time. And I do want to fulfill my job. And my job is to somehow, well, it is a gift. To be able to attempt to weave together your marvelous remarks in a conversation. So I'll begin by thanking all of our respondents for your responses, as well as for thanking Dionne immensely for your gorgeous and generous reading. And so in the spirit of weaving, I don't know if maybe I can invite everybody to be on screen with me. because this is not about just me. Is it possible for us to be on screen together? Yes, wonderful. Okay. Hi, everybody. And again, I'm going to have to apologize because my internet is unstable and I kept moving from room to room in the background. And I hope that it will at least let me pose a question that you can respond to. So I think I want to start with Andrea's response as a jumping off point, because there was something that you formulated that I feel like got to the substance of the temporality and the mapping practice that Dionne is trying to get us to think with. And it is something that each one of you touched on in different ways in terms of a relationship between time, generation, and space. And I just want to read that particular passage from Andrea's piece, where she remarks that Bola knows that the losses of the middle passage cannot be recovered. Yet her skill is also a refusal to believe in endings. And so the ocean she loves becomes a generation's map of the world, and the memories she bequeaths are an unending story of recovery, even in loss. She knows that beyond every entrapment brought to bear against Black life, that life will continue. And I wanted to thank you for that formulation, because it really does get at the tension, the strategy of mapping that I find so resonant in MAP. And it's something that Saidiya referenced in her comments as the enfolding of time in the afterlife of transatlantic slavery. But it's an unfolding that occurs in ways that underline how it has been irrevocably constitutive. The afterlife of transatlantic slavery has been irrevocably constitutive of Black life in diaspora, and yet what we live is the struggle to not have it define us, right? And so I wanted to actually hear each one of you maybe talk about that tension, both in your own work and in its unfolding in MAP, right? The tension of, right, the middle passive being both constitutive of Black life and yet not able to fully define it. And Saidiya, for example, you talked about how to travel through the door. It's a question of traveling through the door and not being broken by it. How to breathe in rooms saturated by red light, right? How to be in the hold and not asphyxiated by it. And Françoise, you brought us back to that question, back to this question, but in the contemporary moment of diasporas of refugees from Haiti, from Africa, from Afghanistan, from Syria, through the door of no return. That is also a gateway of hope, right? As a place to imagine another future, even in the brutality that is being exercised against them, right? On the walk to the border, on the border of freezing cold, right, in Eastern Europe. So I just wanted to hear you all sort of speak again to that tension that Andrea raised so beautifully, that, you know, that Mabel, that you talk about in relationship to the structure of mapping of space in time, right? That is shared by both cartographers and architects. But I just wanted to ask you to go around and maybe speak to that as well. Who shall I call on first?
I'll say something. I mean, one of the things on rereading that was so surprising is, I mean, there are some really, really hard sentences in this book. But there's something about its composition and all the space and air in it that allows you to sit and to be like stopped at those really hard sentences, but not fixed there. And, Dionne has this phrase, which I love, she talks about these radiant moments of ordinariness. And those radiant moments of ordinariness are so important. I mean, I think that what I really appreciate about the work is its complexity, because that's there with the terror, it's there with the abyss, it's there with the door. It's not like, oh, these radiant moments rescue us from that, but they, allow for amplification, they allow for breath.
If I could say a short thing too, I think that the sort of evidence of that tension is our very presence, right? That our insistence on being and existing, that the thing we cannot avoid doing is be and exist. And the thing we insist on, in a sense, is our very existence, is that we continue, right? And so those sort of radiant moments are produced as this kind of this leap into a future, the leap that I think Black people continue to make beyond the terror, the leap through the terror, the leap over the terror. And it's always a moment of difficulty, because it really might end badly, right? And it often does. And we've had, like, over the last year or so of this pandemic that we've been living, we've had really explosive moments of those kinds of endings, George Floyd, for example. But it's our insistence on our refusal of those moments of terror, and the kind of courage we gather in this insistence beyond terror. So that is the vision that we have, is the kind of vision beyond terror. And so that's the vision we move toward, as Françoise spoke about in her piece too. And this insistence too, which is the deep contradiction of the moment that we live in, of what is it that Andrea called it? To live in relation and not in possession. Like, that's the big conflict all the time, right? Between the peoples that we come from and the regimes that we live under, right? I'll stop there for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, what I was trying to say, and what Mab and Dionne's novel really helps me do, is realize the need to see clearly, right? That there's a necessity to that clarity, the clarity of the violence, the hurt that is brought to bear against Black life, the standing in Elmina in the middle of the women's dungeon and smelling the blood and sweat, that is necessary, right? That clarity is necessary, that understanding, what Christina Sharpe calls knowing the ground we walk on. So once we see that clearly, and we allow ourselves to understand the urgency of it, and we feel the hurt and the pain, and we look at these maps that they have offered us as people, as academics, as whatever in our various lives, and we know that these maps are leading towards something called unfreedom, something like slavery, something like death, then we have to say, well, if there are lines that move me in this direction, there must be lines that move me away. So how do I invent another route, another pathway? And how do I make life in the spaces, right? Even in the spaces of the terror? How does one still live, still laugh, still love, right? And Saidiya Hartman's book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, I think, speaks to this so beautifully, right? Even in the terror, Black people are still getting onto boats, still crossing shores, right? Haitians are still moving, that insistence that Black life, Black thought, Black art, Black beauty exists even in the in-between spaces of the hurt.
I'm reminded of something in a book called An Archipelago of Solidarity. And it's young African arriving in one of these Greek islands where they are encamped. And there are some French who ask them questions and want them to talk, so how, terrible it was. And these are young men say, but we are in fact, we are the current Odyssey. We are really the heroes of the 21st century. We are incredibly, we find friends, we create groups of friends, we help each other. So there is all the hurt, there is all the enslavement along the way, there is all this, but there is also that. And I think this is also why there is such violence and hatred, because of what Dionne said, of this incredible force that defy everything that we'd want to kill it. And so I think, the incredible brutality and the violence is because there is something that does not die and will not die. And I was really impressed by this young man who, full of energy, and even though they had been, traveling for, some of them for 8 to 9 years before arriving on this island. We have no idea. And whereas any young white man who traveled, I don't know, to India, there is a book about it, and it's about travel, it's about discovering of the self. There is not equivalent for that in the imagination, even though these are incredible, a thing that very few people will be capable of. So I agree that there is incredible, really, it's life against death deeply, and this has been always that that life will be stronger. The aspiration for life will be stronger than the regime of murder and death that slavery, colonialism, and imperialism, try to impose. It's I do see the rage and the hatred of European police or the border police in the US, because there is something that really almost enraged them by seeing that. So, and this, as you were saying, Andrea, should not, of course, mask the brutality and the violence, but through what I think that it's something is being expressed there that offer us really, it's not a response to the brutality, it's something else. It does not answer, it's absolutely constantly on somewhere else, in another space, in another temporality. And that's what is such a source still of strength and courage and love.
Yeah, I would only add, and I do love the part of Andrea's talk you pointed out, Tina, about possession versus being, and I do think that part of what I was trying to intimate that I think is the beauty of the way in which Dionne wrote Map, and those sections of the map and the ways in which she shows, these kind of modes of wayfinding that rely on systems of abstraction and a kind of the cartographic logic. I was trying to say that they're not just in the maps, but they're in the very places that we dwell, right? Through these other modalities of drawing, right? That build a world, that build a fort, that don't just locate it, but actually construct it. And yet, what Dionne offers in these other sections are ways of being, you know, daily practices, kinship, community, you know, other things that sort of unravel and sort of deny the energy to maintain that system, right? Because that's what it requires, is it requires preservation, it requires maintenance. And I think there are ways in which that energy can go to care, can go in other ways that we construct an other place or an other world that isn't trapped within that regime, which, you know, just continues and continues and continues, right, in its tentacles.
But I thought, but there was also something else about that you were honing in on that was also really striking to me, Mabel, which is that you were thinking about temporality and the practice, the everyday practices that Black folks create to weather that, you know, in Christina's words. But where you were talking about, you were actually giving us a way of thinking about it through a fuller sensorium, right? So a sensorium of forgetting, right? And I loved that moment in your presentation, in your response, where you're talking about forgetting as a prophylactic to ontoepistemic violence, right? And the way, there was something that was incredibly moving to me that connected directly to Dionne's writing practice in MAP, which was about, you know, not just about the witnessing of, right? About being beside those in that unfolding time. It was about how that encounter was through a full sensorium of listening, of smelling, of tasting, of touching. Right, there were these moments that are so gorgeous to me when you're talking about the sea as something you smell, something you taste, something that you feel, right? Not even being in the sea, but it is its mist, it's all those forms. And your description, Mabel, of the smell of the fort, right? And I have this, it jogged so much in me because, you know, as somebody who grew up outside of DC, every year we would go to all of these memorial sites of slavery, Mount Vernon, Williamsburg, Jamestown, you know, even Frederick Douglass's home that had that smell, right? That smell of the must of the remains of slavery. And to me, it was really about what you were evoking was, you know, being in those sites, those embodied encounters, right, that we have to also engage in order to participate in the unfolding of time, right, participate in the relationship to generations, and to participate in a full sensory experience of both remembering and forgetting, right, that is a survival tactic. And I amplify that element of MAP so extraordinarily powerfully in a way that connects directly, Andrea, to what you're describing about sitting with, right? About being with. And I just wanted to sort of, I mean, we've got like 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. And I felt like each one of you were trying to get us to think about the sensory practice of remembrance and forgetting. And that is an embodied experience of being and being with. And I don't know, that was my vanity. That's my vanity. Oh, Dionne, we can't hear you.
I think I just took myself off, actually. Okay. So one of the things I was thinking about when Mabel was speaking about that map by Herman Mall of the West Coast is that Herman Mall, well, of course, they made lots of maps that they covered that all colonial territories. And Herman Mall has a map of Jamaica, which I also looked at. And the the explanation of the marks on the map only have, and I think, I can't remember what year that map was. Wait a minute, I'll find it. Anyway, never mind, some year of theirs, some moment of theirs, some year of theirs. But the explanation of the map goes something like towns, sugar works, indigo works, cotton works, cacao works. That's the legend of the map. That's all that's happening on that island, right? And then I think of what we know of Jamaica now, music, you know, the beauty of the people who came through all of that, right? Who survived his legend, who survived these explanations, those particular explanations on the maps, as something else, right? Into the present. And so that also took me to remembering. So during the writing of A Map to the Door of No Return, I determined not to go to the Door of No Return because it wasn't necessary. To go to the Door of No Return, it existed, yeah? And then when I did go to the Door of No Return, and I stand in the middle of Elmina and also of Cape Coast, it occurred to me, the miracle of my and my friend's existence occurred to me. So when you talk, Tina, about, you know, the embodiment of that moment of that time, of the terror, as well as, and so on. What also occurred to me was the presence, right? And your presence in presence, right? In that old presence and in the now, and the miracle of your existence, of my existence, in some, very briefly, mind you, very briefly, it occurred like it was felt like a miracle, but it was just this, wow. You know, and you could hear, in a sense, all the beings that existed before you saying, damn, you're still here. Like after all of that, right? It felt like that. And I suddenly wished that everyone could go and do that. But I think like in a work like Wayward Lives, like Saidiya does that by reimagining, like rethinking, refeeling all the possibilities that those women and girls moving north felt and were possible for them, really, really quite real in a particular moment, right? Their possibilities, you know? And that anyway, those are the things that I thought about as we were all talking. And I also want to say to Françoise, oui, nous tous traversons la porte à l'époque et maintenant. May not be the same, but yes, we all traverse the door then and now. Yeah. So that's my.
I will ask if there are any questions that people want to pose in the Q&A in the last, 3 to 6 minutes that we have left. I would welcome those. But if not, I will also ask, I mean, that's a beautiful comment. But if anybody else wants to make a final comment before we welcome our amazing organizers back onto the stage for a final round of applause and celebration. Anybody want to add anything else? Bless you, Mabel. Bless you, Mabel. Okay, then I will invite Christina and Canisia and the other organizers to join the stage, and I'm going to wrap up by just thanking everybody right now, and thanking everyone who's been with us for the duration. Thank you. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation and a marvelous reading.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as we close out this spectacular event, I think we already have some of the members of the team. I'm going to call them out onto the Zoom screen with us. Let me begin with the phenomenal and wonderful trio of graduate students who are truly responsible for making this vision possible. So please join us on screen, Marceline Fletcher, Michelle Malubi, and Aisha Campbell. There they are. Are you all there? Yes, there they are. Oh my goodness. These three women just amazing, and we're all just so grateful to you. And in a selfish promotion of York's programs in Black Studies, if I may, Marceline, who presented that brilliant paper yesterday, Blue Dreams, Black Sleep, is completing a PhD in the theories of race and racism stream in the graduate program in social and political thought. And Michelle and Aisha, both in the MA program in humanities, are graduates of the Black Canadian Studies certificate. Ellen, can you come join us as well? This artistic visionary who curated the opening exhibition Thresholds, wading through Dionne Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return. Thank you, Ellen, so much. This exhibition featured the work of Abdi Osman, Canisia Lubrin, Christina Battle, Mohammed Abdul Karim Ali, Cecily Nicholson, Chantal Gibson, and Kevin Adonis Brown. And then my colleagues and friends and best kind of co-conspirators, Leslie Sanders, David Chariandi, Rinaldo Walcott, and Canisia Lubrin. When Christina had this idea, and she's had it for a while, to reflect on and celebrate the 20th anniversary of MAP, she entrusted this vision to us, and you all handled it with such care and devotion and uncompromising commitment to excellence. So thank you all so much. And to all our presenters and readers, those of you who have joined us on Zoom or watched the live stream, thank you for holding space for and with us this week, for your brilliant theorizations, your art, your moving incantations, your presence on social media, all of which we felt so deeply. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Canisia now to announce a wonderful new opportunity for emerging writers, and then Christina is going to wrap up. Canisia?
Andrea, thank you so much. I want to add my own heaping thanks on top of the other heaps and the more to come, I'm sure. Oh man. We who have gathered for the past 4 days have received and given so much. Yet we are only at the beginning of our appreciation of the work that has come together in this days-long conversation. It's no overstatement to say that it will continue to unfold across our time, perhaps other generations, and even more mappings. And it is in that spirit that I am just full of joy to help announce this fellowship for 2 emerging writers through the Focus Literary Festival. And there's going to be a video announcement.
Hello everyone, my name is Nicholas Laughlin. I'm the Program Director of the Bocas Lit Fest in Trinidad and Tobago, here to tell you about a new opportunity for early career Caribbean writers opening for applications today. I'm delighted to be speaking to you at the end of this landmark conference dedicated to the landmark book, A Map to the Door of No Return, an inexhaustible text that seems relevant in new ways each time I reread it. A Map to the Door of No Return has been an inspiration and a provocation for 2 generations of Caribbean and diaspora writers, so it seems more than fitting, near the end of this conference, to announce a pair of fellowships intended to help nurture new literary talent. The 2 Bocas Emerging Writers Fellowships, which will be awarded simultaneously in 2022, are one-time fellowships for emerging Caribbean-based writers in English in 2 categories: prose, whether fiction or non-fiction, and poetry. They are intended to support early career Caribbean writers whose work explores questions, ideas, and genre-crossing forms that follow and expand the tradition of books like A Map to the Door of No Return. The fellowships will run for a period of 6 months, during which both writers will receive support in advancing or completing a book manuscript or other body of work. There will be a cash award, structured mentorship, the opportunity to participate in a virtual writing workshop hosted by the UK-based literary organization Avon, and at the end of the fellowships, each writer will publish a chapbook of work in progress with Pcash Press. The fellowships are made possible by generous donations from Canisia Lubrin, Dionne Brand, Christina Sharpe, and Alison Holder. We are extremely grateful to them for this tangible, practical support for new Caribbean writers. You can find more information about the Bocas Emerging Writers Fellowships, including application deadlines, on the Bocas Litfest website, bocaslitfest.com, and you'll also see the URL on screen at the end of this video. Please help us spread the word, and congratulations on this extraordinary virtual conference.
It is time to give more thanks. First, to all of the participants today and across these 4 days, and also to everyone who joined. Thanks to the organizing committee, Leslie Sanders, Canisia Lubran, Ronaldo Walcott, David Chariandi, and most especially Ellen Walker and the graduate student research assistants without whom this event would not have been possible. Marcel Ann Fletcher, Michelle Malubi, Aisha Campbell, and also Tony Johnson for his editing skills. The team of York University staff, without which this event would also not have been possible: Jason Verbovsky, Bertland Imai, Dina Taha, Rosani Silveraja, Sasha Smith, Natalia Whittingham, Anam Rahim, Christopher Hendershot, and Rodolfo Arata. Also thanks to Joanne and Jessica, the ASL interpreters today, and all of the closed captioners who have assisted us these past 4 days. To my humanities colleagues and the staff of humanities, Alicia Clements, Sari Ramjatan, Victor Shea, David Kichetto, especially. We want to thank our co-sponsors, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the Canada Research Chair, the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies at York University, the Department of Humanities at York University, including the graduate program in humanities and the Black Canadian Studies Certificate, the LANPS Anti-Black Racism Research Initiative Fund, the Department of English at Simon Fraser University, the School of English and Theatre Studies at the University of Guelph, the International Institute for Critical Studies in Improvisation, also at the University of Guelph, Silence at Guelph, Robarts Centre for Canadian Studies at York, and Topia, Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies. Thanks as well to Lynn Henry,
my editor and chief editor, and Martha Kenyon Forster, the publisher of Knopf Canada, who are publishing a new edition of A Map to the Door of No Return in fall 2022. A Map to the Door of No Return at 20, a gathering, and what a gathering, is part of an ongoing project, which is the Black Still Life Research and Working Group, which comes out of the Canada Research Chair in Black Studies and Humanities at York University, which I lead. In the near future, we envision a conference on Black radical poetics that will bring together poets from all around the world. So hold this spot. A Map to the Door of No Return at 20, a gathering, has been a revelation. It's what I will call a breathing, that collective noun for Black people assembled in a chorus, assembled in the work of doing the work, to quote, live in the living of it. It has been an abundance to tarry with this book, to carry it around, to hold open the space that it makes, that contronym tarry, a word that has repeated across panels and days. What A Map to the Door of No Return notes to belonging prompts in terms of genre and form and structure has been met at every turn. It is a catalyzing of what we imagine and what we hope books do in the world. I will end as I began, sitting with this book, rereading it across time, space, geography, and geohistory, sitting with all of you as you sat with A Map to the Door of No Return and shared the evidence of your sitting with us. We know that it is our faith and our good fortune that Brand could write A Map to the Door of No Return, Notes to Belonging, 20 years ago. And we can feel its company and gather together in it now. We have heard from all around the world how profound the effect is of your thinking, your interventions, your wanderings, your drifts, and your tarrying. What gifts they have been, what gifts they are. This gathering has been a profound practice of Black study. We are humbled and truly grateful. Thank you.